In Rome, certain names never return quietly. When they appear again, they carry with them old tensions that never fully settled, memories that never received a clear resolution, and questions that were pushed aside rather than answered. In recent weeks, what looked like routine administrative appointments have stirred something deeper inside the Church, bringing back a name that for many Catholics remains tied to one of the most painful controversies of recent memory. The name is Pachamama, a term foreign to traditional Catholic language but one that began to circulate in Vatican conversations years ago. For some, it symbolized openness and dialogue with indigenous cultures. For others, it represented a troubling shift that blurred the boundaries of faith. To understand why this issue has resurfaced now, it helps to look back to the moment when the controversy first exploded into public view. On October 4, 2012, the feast of Saint Francis of Assisi, an event took place in the Vatican gardens that would later become a turning point in debates about identity, culture, and belief. At the time, preparations were underway for discussions connected to the Amazon region, and what happened that day was presented as part of a broader effort to reflect on indigenous traditions. Observers, journalists, and ordinary believers watched as a ceremony unfolded that included gestures and symbols unfamiliar to Catholic worship. At the center stood a wooden statue identified by participants as Pachamama, a figure connected to Andean cosmologies and spiritual traditions. If you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos like this, because what you're about to hear is not just news, it's a wake-up call for every heart that still believes truth should burn brighter than silence. Now grab your rosary, quiet your spirit, and let your heart listen, not just with ears, but with faith. The event was recorded and shared widely. The footage showed participants kneeling, bowing, and engaging in actions that many viewers interpreted as acts of veneration rather than cultural appreciation. Supporters of the ceremony argued that it represented respect for indigenous peoples and their traditions. Critics insisted that it crossed a line that had long been considered unthinkable within the Church. For them, the problem was not cultural exchange itself but what appeared to be religious gestures directed toward a figure outside the Christian tradition. The images sparked intense reactions across the Catholic world, creating a divide between those who welcomed new forms of dialogue and those who feared a dangerous confusion of beliefs. The controversy did not end in the gardens. In the days that followed, the same statue appeared inside St. Peter's Basilica, one of the most sacred spaces in Christianity. There, additional rituals were reported, further intensifying debate. Videos and photographs spread rapidly online, drawing commentary from theologians, bishops, and ordinary Catholics who struggled to understand what they were witnessing. Some described the events as a sincere attempt at inculturation, a process through which the Church adapts its message to different cultures. Others viewed them as an example of syncretism, the blending of religions in a way that undermines clear doctrine. The disagreement was not limited to scholars or clergy. It reached parish communities, social media conversations, and everyday discussions among believers trying to make sense of a rapidly changing religious landscape. The situation escalated when a Catholic layman removed several of the statues from a church and threw them into the Tiber River. The act itself became another flashpoint. While some praised the gesture as a defense of the faith, others condemned it as disrespectful and divisive. The Vatican's response added yet another layer to the controversy. Instead of distancing itself from the events that had sparked outrage, officials publicly apologized to those who felt offended by the removal of the statues. For critics, this response signaled an implicit acceptance of the religious significance attributed to Pachamama. For supporters, it represented a call for respect and a rejection of hostility. The gap between these interpretations widened the sense that something fundamental had changed. Over time, the name Pachamama faded from official conversations. The controversy gradually slipped out of headlines, replaced by new debates and new challenges facing the Church. Yet the underlying questions never disappeared. There was no definitive doctrinal clarification, no formal statement that fully explained the events or addressed the theological concerns raised by critics. The silence left a lingering sense of uncertainty. For many believers, the issue felt like an unfinished conversation, a chapter that had been closed without being resolved. Years later, that unresolved past has resurfaced in an unexpected way. A recent announcement from the Holy See listed new consultants appointed to the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue, one of the Vatican offices responsible for engaging with people of different faiths. The official statement used neutral language and provided little commentary beyond the names and backgrounds of the appointees. On the surface, the changes appeared routine, part of the normal functioning of church administration. But observers quickly noticed that several of the newly appointed consultants had strong connections to theological movements emphasizing inculturation, religious pluralism, and indigenous spiritual traditions. Some had previously spoken about Pachamama in ways that suggested a personal spiritual connection rather than a purely cultural interest. Statements attributed to a few of these figures over the years drew particular attention. In certain contexts, Pachamama was described not simply as a symbol of cultural heritage but as an entity toward which individuals expressed forms of spiritual belonging. Phrases declaring allegiance or devotion to Pachamama raised concerns among those who believe that such language conflicts with core Christian teachings. The issue moved beyond the memory of a single event and into a broader discussion about the direction of theological reflection within the Church. The Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue operates in a complex space where language, symbolism, and intention carry enormous weight. Its work involves building relationships across religious boundaries while maintaining a clear sense of Catholic identity. Because of this delicate balance, the selection of its consultants is closely scrutinized. Supporters of the recent appointments argue that they reflect the Church's commitment to listening to diverse voices and engaging with cultures that have historically been marginalized. Critics worry that certain approaches risk presenting all spiritual paths as equally valid in a way that undermines doctrinal clarity. The debate touches on larger questions that have shaped church life for decades. Since the period following the Second Vatican Council, Catholic leaders have wrestled with how to balance fidelity to tradition with openness to cultural diversity. Different pontificates have approached this tension in different ways, but the underlying struggle remains recognizable. The Pachamama controversy now appears to many observers as one moment within a longer process rather than an isolated incident. The recent appointments under the current pontificate have reignited concerns that this process may be moving further in a particular direction, though official statements have left room for multiple interpretations. Beyond specific individuals or policies, the controversy has revived an ongoing conversation about the meaning of dialogue itself. When does respectful engagement with other traditions strengthen the Church's mission, and when does it risk blurring the distinctions that define Christian belief? The emphasis on religious pluralism in recent years has been praised by some as a necessary response to a globalized world. Others worry that presenting different spiritual paths as equally effective routes to human fulfillment may weaken the Church's claim to proclaim a unique truth. The line between dialogue and assimilation can be difficult to define, especially when official language avoids direct theological confrontation. For many faithful Catholics, the renewed attention to Pachamama is less about a statue or a specific ceremony and more about the larger question of identity. They see the symbol as representing an ongoing tension between preserving a clear sense of the sacred and adapting to cultural realities. The absence of definitive clarification from church authorities leaves believers to interpret events on their own, often leading to confusion or frustration. Some feel that the Church has not adequately addressed the concerns raised years ago, while others believe the controversy has been exaggerated by those resistant to change. The resurfacing of the Pachamama issue through recent appointments has therefore become a focal point for broader anxieties about the future of the Church. Supporters of the current direction emphasize the need for compassion, listening, and respect for diverse cultural expressions of faith. Critics argue that without clear boundaries, dialogue risks turning into relativism, where doctrinal differences are minimized in the name of unity. Both sides claim to be defending the integrity of the Church, but they differ sharply in how they define that integrity. As debates continue, the central question remains unresolved. Where is the line between cultural exchange and religious confusion? How can the Church engage with indigenous traditions without compromising its core teachings? What does it mean to honor diversity while maintaining a clear proclamation of faith? These questions are not new, but they feel newly urgent each time the name Pachamama reappears in public discourse. For now, the Vatican's silence on the deeper theological issues leaves space for speculation and interpretation. The appointments themselves may prove to be ordinary administrative decisions, or they may signal a broader continuity with past approaches. Without explicit clarification, both possibilities remain open. Among many believers, the sense persists that clarity is needed not to fuel division but to provide reassurance about the Church's direction. The story of Pachamama has become more than a historical controversy. It is a lens through which ongoing tensions within the Church are examined and debated. Each time the name resurfaces, it brings with it the memory of unresolved wounds and the hope that future decisions might address them more directly. As discussions continue, the focus shifts from a single event in the Vatican gardens to the larger challenge of defining how the Church engages with a changing world while remaining faithful to its identity. The outcome remains uncertain, but the questions raised by the controversy continue to shape conversations about the present and the future of Catholic life. If this message touched your heart, like this video and share your thoughts in the comment or comment Amen and stay with us. More Eucharistic stories, deeper reflections, and holy insights are on the way. May Christ in the Eucharist be your light, your rest, your truth. Amen.